Boy, this really wasn't supposed to be a news channel, but with the recent happenings last week, I'm gonna have to put my 2 cents in. Hey everyone, I'm Roxanne and welcome back to the Living Free from Abuse channel, where knowledge is power. So unless you've been living under a rock, you'd know by now that Charlie Kirk, a right-wing political talking head and founder of Turning Point USA, was assassinated in broad daylight in front of thousands of people, including his wife and young daughter, while he was hosting an on-campus debating event at Utah Valley University. Personally, I found the whole thing horrifying. I really don't know that much about Charlie Kirk. I've seen a few videos of him debating college students on my TikTok For You feed. As far as I saw, his content was kind of like Steven Crowder, where he went on college campuses to debate random students about different political issues like affirmative action / DEI, or issues around the queer community or BLM or whatever else. Now, people have shown me different clips or quotes of Charlie Kirk saying various things that I don't agree with, and certainly in dealing with some people, the way he spoke definitely had some amount of nonchalance and arrogance that's pretty common among a lot of public figures that have amassed a certain amount of fame. Could you say the guy was insensitive or divisive? Sure, in my opinion, but I still don't think it warrants a public assassination. I think it's terrifying that someone could be murdered in broad daylight like that because he had opinions that people didn't agree with. Because regardless of whether you lean left or you lean right, who's to say you might not say something that angers someone or a community of people? And then what? Are they going to be justified in killing you because you said something a certain group found offensive? Quite frankly, that public assassination was one of the most violent things I think I've seen caught on camera since September 11th. And how strange that it was almost on that exact day when it happened. Now, people are entitled to feel any way they feel about Charlie Kirk. We can't talk about how important free speech is and then force people to honor a man they felt was divisive or hateful. Celebrating it, I think, is terrible in my opinion, especially when typically liberals tend to preach a message of tolerance regardless of race, culture, or worldview, and murdering someone because of their political leanings or worldview, I would say, is the very definition of intolerance. Anyway, I wanted to say, as a Christian, the kind of Christianity I believe in and the kind of Christianity Charlie Kirk seemed to stand by are almost at polar opposite ends. As far as I know, the message of Christ centered around a life of service, particularly to the poor, the downtrodden, and the infirmed. Christ led a life of poverty and servitude and said it was harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than a camel to go through the eye of a needle. But the kind of Christianity that I see practiced and preached by the American evangelical right revolves around nationalism, prosperity, and wealth development. It's an America first sort of identity with an emphasis on capitalism. And the kind of Christianity I was introduced to when I accepted Christ focused on a global message, where it was important as a mandate to go out into the world sharing the gospel message and hope to everyone because God so loved the world, not just Americans. The type of Christians I was around in college were the kind that believed in global missions, going to various countries to preach the gospel and translate Bibles and bring medicine and supplies and education to, like scripture says, every tongue, tribe, and nation. The global Christian sees immigration as an opportunity to bring Christianity to people coming from countries where it's inaccessible or maybe even outlawed. But the Christianity I see being practiced on the American right, I don't even see a resemblance between that and the message of Christ, where it's, I don't want my tax dollars going towards lazy homeless people, and I don't see why my tax dollars should be helping refugees. Why should America be sending foreign aid to impoverished, failed states where people are dying of AIDS? How is that my problem? It's a very selfish type of Christianity, in my opinion, and in my interpretation of the gospel. As far as I'm concerned, if you cared about the poor, if you cared about the vulnerable, and if you cared about the infirmed, you wouldn't care whether assisting them was coming out of your tax dollars, and you wouldn't care what country these people were coming from or what country that foreign aid was going to. Also, another thing I see going on is that in response to this whole Charlie Kirk assassination, the conservative right has pretty much declared war on the left. What happened to Christ's commandment to bless those who curse you and do good to those who mistreat you? I guess that went out the window. And I get it. I also find it hard to do good to people who've hurt me. I tend to swear them off and never speak to them again, but that's not what we're commanded to do. Romans 12 says, don't repay evil for evil. And now, instead of seeing this as the actions of one young man who from the report seemed to spend too much time in internet chat rooms and forums that were fueling his extremism, people are saying the left killed Charlie Kirk. The entire political spectrum of the left killed Charlie Kirk, like everyone was in cahoots with this kid. And that's another thing I'm worried about, that this has now turned the United States into a free-for-all, because you've got right-wing extremists and you've got left-wing extremists. And it seems like everyone has taken this to mean, okay, anyone is fair game. As long as you say something I find offensive, well, look at Ben Shapiro's recent thumbnail, literally demonizing trans people. Tyler Robinson, the man who shot Kirk, apparently had a trans girlfriend, and now it's trans people with their woke ideology killed Charlie Kirk. This has turned into some kind of bloodlust towards the queer community, and it's crazy. Now, people are also demonizing the trans community because the Minneapolis mass shooter who opened fire at a Catholic church back in August was a detransitioner, meaning at first this person identified as a girl and went through a medical transition from male to female, but then this individual, Robin Westman, decided that he had been brainwashed by trans ideology and regretted his transition, and then decided to take it out on this Catholic school for some reason, which makes no sense because one would imagine that a Catholic school would be more conservative leaning and probably against gender transitioning. Ironically enough, this was what Charlie Kirk was debating at the time he was shot. Now, I really don't know much about the demographics of mass shooters. As far as I know, this is the first time I've heard of a trans person perpetrating a mass shooting. When it comes to what's been reported in mainstream media, the race and gender of mass shooters are overwhelmingly white males. But I'm guessing that if there have been any other school shooters who were trans, I'd assume it's probably only a small fraction when compared to the number of heteronormative male shooters, considering that in the US only 1% of people aged 13 years and older identified as trans, according to the Williams Institute. So trying to say that the trans community is somehow connected to mass shootings and is responsible for the death of Charlie Kirk, I think is ludicrous. I think it's a case where people are hurt, they're angry, and they want someone to blame, so why not further demonize a community you didn't like to begin with? The person who killed Charlie Kirk was a heteronormative male, but they had a trans girlfriend, so ipso facto, trans people are the reason Charlie Kirk is dead. Anyway, the issue of demonizing a community isn't just a transgression of the right, but the left overwhelmingly demonizes Christians. They lump us all together as if we're a monolith, and no community I'm aware of to date is a monolith. A lot of liberals will say Christianity is incompatible with liberal values, and they generally don't tend to like any kind of religion. But I'll give you some interesting statistics here. According to the Pew Research Center, atheists are most likely to be male, under the age of 49, and are most likely to be white and have a college degree. And that's something I really found to be very hypocritical about the left. You preach tolerance and diversity, but y'all have an ick factor when it comes to anyone who's religious. And let's face it, most non-white immigrants who come to North America probably retain some kind of religious identity. And I found when I went to TMU to do my master's in journalism, letting people know I was a Christian was like a bad word, particularly when it came to my professors. But atheism is largely a white Western movement, unless you want to count the Communist Party of China, which has pretty much banned freedom of religion. And I found the common thought among liberals on social media is that atheism or secularism is more advanced. Secular societies are more advanced than other societies where religion is a dominant part of the culture. So you think you're preaching tolerance, but all it's looking like to me is another form of white supremacy. White secular cultures are more advanced than you non-white immigrants worshiping sky daddies. Now, I'll personally admit that I do find that societies where religion plays a dominant role in the culture tend to be homophobic, tend to stigmatize marginalized groups, tend to have very strict gender roles that can border on misogynistic. When you think about how women are viewed if they don't get married and have children, oh, and God forbid you have any fertility struggles, then you're cursed or unfortunate, as if your identity and worth as a woman is completely nullified if you're not a wife and mother. So there's definitely something there, but maybe it's social reforms that can be made within religious societies rather than doing away with religion completely. But what I think I'm finding is that the typical white liberals discussed at religion, particularly Christianity, I think is coming from a trauma response. And I'm not saying that to be dismissive. Religious abuse is a real thing, especially if you don't fit the social norms within said religion. So if you're queer, if you're trans, if you're neurodivergent, or you have mental health struggles, or if you just in some way don't fit the very heteronormative norms within that religious society, and people are trying to bend and break you to fit the mold, it can be very traumatic.
One of the scariest things for me growing up gay and Christian was this fear of being the only gay person. And I had been so conditioned to believe that one day I was going to have a wife and kids. And so naturally coming to the realization that that wasn't how my life was going to go was pretty scary. But I had also been wired to believe that being straight is like what you're supposed to be. And had I not been raised in the Christian bubble that I was, I definitely think that I would have been more secure with my identity and I would have been more comfortable dating.
And let's face it, Christian institutions have done some pretty horrendous human rights abuses if you consider conversion therapy camps, or even going back to indigenous residential schools. And then you have the prevalence of pedophilia among celibate priesthoods. It's not like there's nothing to complain about. And when you consider that the majority of modern North American atheists today probably spent their childhoods being raised within traditional Christian homes, one can maybe understand the particular animosity they have towards Christianity over any other religious groups. Hence why liberals are more likely to defend a woman's right to wear the hijab than defend a Christian's right to wear a cross. I don't say it's right to swear off all Christians because of trauma. That's like swearing off all African Americans because you were robbed at gunpoint by a black male. It's understandable, but it doesn't make it right. And here's another thing that happened over the weekend. Over 100,000 people, mostly white Britons, took to the streets in London to protest immigration in the UK. Now, a lot of people are looking at this as a far-right manifestation of racism and intolerance. But I think this is a huge consequence of constantly demonizing the white locals of their own countries. Listen, I'm a Jamaican refugee. I came to Canada and was given asylum and hospitality by the Canadian government. I'm grateful, I'm thankful. Among the countries with the best human rights policies and legislation are Canada, the United Kingdom, and Western Europe. You can come to the country and still be proud of where you're from. They'll say you don't have to do away with your culture. You can fly your flag with pride, except if you're a white national of the country. And by white national, I mean white citizen. I get it. Historically, European colonialism has some horrible atrocities under its belt, namely the transatlantic slave trade. So a lot of people have this knee-jerk reaction to equate a white person flying the American flag or the St. George's Cross with the ills of the black African slave trade. But if you keep doing that, if we keep holding the whites of today under the guilt of their forefathers, if everyone else can fly their flag high and it's seen as diversity, but a European person flying their flag high is automatically branded as a racist, and any of their complaints about ill treatment are seen as invalid, and the only people who can be the victims of injustice or racial prejudice are non-whites, where our suffering is seen as authentic oppression, but their suffering is seen as whining, and their complaints are constantly silenced. This is where you're going to have this explosion. And by the way, nobody wants to talk about the black African slave trade happening today in modern times in many Arab Muslim states. You have North African countries like Mauritania still trafficking black Africans today. And then you have countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Kuwait with the highest prevalence of modern day slavery. Nobody wants to talk about those injustices, but you still want to demonize whites for a practice that was abolished over 160 years ago, of which one of the first countries to abolish the black slave trade was Britain in 1807. But we still want to demonize the whites of today and say, no, you can't wave your flag. You can't complain about any injustices you face. And no matter what, you can't experience prejudice or oppression because the systems in place in your own countries were established by European power structures. And by the way, can I say this? Racism or racial prejudice is a human condition. It's not the invention of whites. I can tell you there are a lot of East and South Asian moms in Canada right now who would never consent to their sons marrying a black woman. I can tell you that straight. Guess who's following me and my kids around the store when I walk into the pharmacy? You think it's a white person? Let me play you this video I saw on TikTok.
Wait, so let's go over this one more time. Are you pro-life or pro-choice? Oh, I'm pro-life 100%. I don't care if it's an accident. You need to follow through. It was your responsibility. Okay, LGBTQ. Do you think they should be allowed to be married? No, see, back in my country, we wouldn't even allow them to be married at all. In fact, it's quite dangerous for them over there. And frankly, that's one of the many laws I don't like about Canada. Okay, well, how about women's equality to men? How do you feel about that? You think women should focus on their careers or raising children? Oh, women should 100% be allowed to have a career as long as they take care of the children. Those seem like very right-wing ideals. Why did you vote liberal? Oh, because of immigration. You see, the conservatives were going to throttle back immigration, and as an immigrant, now that I'm a citizen, I would like to have more of my family come over, and the liberals make it much easier. Okay, but the majority of people that vote for liberals have the opposite ideals as you. Does that mean you're eventually going to change your mindset about all those other topics that we talked about? Oh no, see, that's the best part about voting for liberals. I'm going to continue my right-wing ideologies on the other topics, and if anyone questions it, the liberal voters will stand up for me and claim that those people are racist. Because that's part of my culture. Isn't that funny? You have left-wing liberals standing up for me and my right to exercise my right-wing ideologies. All because I come from a different country. You see, because I can do things such as prevent my wife from developing her career or preventing my daughters from going to university because I think they should just stay home, become stay-at-home parents. Hell, I can even show the most outright racist behavior such as prevent my family from dating outside our race. But if you were to point out my sexist and racist behavior, the liberals will stand up for me and label you a racist and a white nationalist. Isn't that amazing?
You guys on the left have got to stop demonizing straight white men as if their lives are devoid of any problems because they're white, so automatically they're on easy street because of white privilege. Now, I'm not saying white privilege doesn't exist, it certainly does, but when you keep demonizing a particular group, it's going to come to a boiling point. And quite frankly, what's erupted in Britain has been a long time coming. This is one of the reasons someone like Trump ended up winning, because you keep on ignoring a certain demographic and you keep on ignoring the issues they're talking about, you keep on putting them on mute, and now they're like, you know what, the hell with all this diversity, equity, and inclusion, the hell with immigrants and refugees. If I'm always the villain, well, you're going to know what villainy is today. I'm really worried because right now, especially because of Charlie Kirk's death, we got lynch mobs who are at the ready now. Everything is too polarized. We've got to find some common ground and stop demonizing each other. Anyway, that's all I got to say about that.
That's all I have to say about that.
Please, guys, we've got to stop seeing each other as the enemy just because we don't agree on every single point. Like scripture says, our war is not against flesh and blood. Make love, not war. Peace out.